And welcome to another episode of Chords and Conversations. I'm Chris Hludzik.
And I'm Bryan Brophy.
And on today's episode, we're going to be discussing music streaming services. So as far as music streaming services go, there is a lot to choose from nowadays. But it didn't always used to be that way. There only used to be a handful that were around. And so today we're going to talk about just the impact that streaming services have had on music in general and the way people consume music and listen to music. Bryan, why don't you go first? Tell us your experiences with music streaming services, when you first came into contact with them, how it's affected you as both a music fan and as a musician.
I'm going to start with iTunes, even though that wasn't really a streaming service at the time. So I am a person who loves to have CDs. And the problem with me is I am a very sloppy person, and I am that person who accidentally scratches his CDs up and everything, and, you know, the cases get broken, and it was just always something. So when iTunes came out, I was like, oh my gosh, I don't have to have all these CDs in my car. Like, I could just get like a little plug-in and put my iPod on, and that's awesome. But then I started really missing having the CD covers and the little booklet inside with the art and the lyrics and all the things about the songs and everything. Fast forward a couple years, Spotify comes out. At first I was a little apprehensive about getting into using Spotify, but one of the members of Maybe Someday, actually our bass player Mike, had his own Spotify account. And I was like, Mike, where do you go to like learn these songs? Like, because we would learn songs for the band, and they weren't necessarily songs that I wanted to listen to all the time. And I'm like, I really feel like buying this. And he's like, oh, like I have Spotify, you know? And I was like, oh, that's interesting. A couple years later, I end up getting into the Spotify game. And at that time, I really, was just like, oh, that's cool. You pay $10 a month or whatever it was, and you can get any song you want. It's crazy. I found that to be really helpful. But I kind of see the shift in culture now. Music is art. And it's almost more so now one and done, right?
There's disposable.
Yes, music is more disposable. So, for instance, these artists are coming up with these wonderful albums and everything. And a kid will be like, oh, I just want the one song. Okay, cool. You download the song, but you don't get the whole experience of the album. And I think nowadays, a lot of the more popular artists, they'll come out with an album, but they'll just come up with a collection of songs. It's not like an album where like there's like a theme or whatever is going on. A lot of these newer artists that are coming out, it's kind of just for the one and done, like download my new song or download my couple songs or whatever. And I just find that it's almost degrading the whole idea of artists being artists and not just for a quick fix. Mm-hmm. It's like they want to hear their favorite song that they just downloaded for that dopamine hit, and then that's it. It's not like I'm going to sit down and really connect with this album or connect with these songs. It's more so like, I want to feel good right now, I'm going to play this song, and then that's it. Shuffle to the next artist. And maybe that's just me being old-fashioned, but for me, I love listening to an album. And if there's a specific song, I love figuring out, like, where does that song fit in the album? And why did they put this song here? And, like, I just love the flow of an album. I'm also starting to notice, too, the bands and the artists are not getting anything out of it other than exposure, really. Like, you pay this fee for, the hosting or whatever, and, it'll distribute to the different, whether it's Amazon Music or Apple Music or Spotify. And then, you get all these plays and you don't get any money. And I feel like artists are really taking a big hit. And it's forcing them now to resort to more touring and merch selling to make up for the fact that they're not making as much money on their albums now because of it. All these streaming services really are screwing over their artists royally.
Yeah.
Fractions of pennies for each play.
Absolutely.
Is just really terrible. Now all my music is on Bandcamp, which is a really nice free platform that you can upload your music for free, and they take like a little percentage if somebody downloads a song or an album or whatever, and I find it wonderful. And there is a paid version where like you get all kinds of bells and whistles and things like that. But the free version of Bandcamp is absolutely fabulous. I can't say enough good things about it.
Yeah. So my experience with music streaming and music download platforms stems back to probably, the early 2000s. And of course, a lot of people in like the late 90s, early 2000s, the whole digital music thing, it was kind of like the Wild West. Mm-hmm. There were rules, but there were no rules, as they say. And so you had places like Napster, LimeWire, Kazaa, all these different sites that people could download music from. And, nobody thought they were doing anything wrong. It was like, well, hey, it's here, it's on the internet, why not? And then, of course, a few years after that, iTunes comes out. And iTunes totally changed the game because it kind of followed the model of those, early peer-to-peer sharing platforms in that if you only wanted a song from an album or a couple songs, you just found those couple songs and you download them. Well, now with iTunes, they gave you the option, you could download the whole album for, I think it was $10. You could download an album for back in the beginning days of iTunes, or you could download just the song for 99 cents. And so that was a really attractive option, I think, especially for younger music fans, because if you didn't have the money for a full album, but you liked the song, whereas before you'd have to put down 15 or 20 bucks for the CD when you only wanted that one song, now you could just pay 99 cents to get that one song. But going back to what you were saying, it kind of screwed up the artistic intentions, for lack of a better term, of what that band or musician had in mind for that song in correlation to the rest of an album or an EP or whatever it was. Because if you take that song out of context, it might not carry the same weight or the same meaning that the band or musician originally intended. And so I think in that way, it sort of killed the album. And I'm a big album guy. I like albums, and just like you, I like to see, why does that song fit there? Why do they choose to put this song in the album? How does this correlate to the other songs going on? And when you take stuff out of context, you lose all that. But again, back in those days, I honestly don't think a lot of music fans really cared about context that much, because we were getting into that era of, social media was just coming to fruition, and, it was all about just instant gratification. And iTunes played to that, because if you just wanted that one or two songs, you could just get that one or two songs. Now, there were some bands that I guess there was an option where you had to buy the whole album. Not every album was like that, where you could just buy one or two songs. There were some bands that they made you buy the whole album.
Or if you wanted a certain song, like all the tracks would be, 99 cents. But if you wanted that song, you had to buy the whole album.
Yes, exactly. So they did things like that. And that kind of, I guess, kept some of the integrity of the album as it was at that time intact. But again, the way these music services looked at it is, well, we've got to give the people what they want. So if they only want one song, we'll just give them the one song. We'll let them take the one song. There were, of course, other download formats at the time. There was Rhapsody was a big one, I remember. Mm-hmm. But over time, it seemed like nobody really was downloading music anymore. Then it became all about streaming.
Streaming, yeah.
And personally, I don't have a problem with streaming. I think it's great if you're on the go and you just want to pull up a song or pull up an album, whatever. It's great to have that ability at your fingertips. But the thing is, you don't own that song that you're streaming. And that was the one thing I liked about iTunes and some of the earlier download format music websites, was that once you paid your 99 cents, you downloaded that song to your hard drive and uploaded it to the media player of your choice, whether it was your iPod or you burned it to a CD or whatever. You owned that song. The problem that I have with the streaming formats is you don't own it. It's all in the cloud, as they say. And the problem with being in the cloud is that just as much as it's in the cloud, it can be taken off the cloud too. And it's the problem that everybody sees with Netflix, for instance. There'll be a movie on Netflix that you like, and you might revisit it a lot. And then all of a sudden, one day you go to turn the TV on, movie's not there anymore because they took it off the service because, either their license ran out to have that on that streaming service, or it moved to another streaming service, and now you've got to pay a fee to another streaming service if you want to keep watching that movie. Whereas if you bought the DVD or the Blu-ray, you have it forever. It's yours. Yep. And that's the thing I like about being able to download music. And that's why I think Bandcamp is a great option, because not only can you stream from Bandcamp through their app, you could also download the songs individually. And it's a lot more freedom, depending on the type of music fan you are. Now, if you're somebody that's just kind of scanning through just to see what's there, you might not care about downloading it. You might just be fine with streaming it, and that's fine. But me personally, if there's a song that I like, I'm going to want to have that song. And I want to make sure that I have that song. And if I can't download it, then I have to go out and seek a physical copy of it. And if there isn't a physical copy, then I've just got to keep my fingers crossed and hope that nobody deletes it off that streaming service. So that's really the downfall, I think, for me with the streaming, is that they giveth and they can taketh away,
Yep. And then that's why YouTube can be very beneficial, because somebody will put an album up on YouTube and then someone will find it and it'll get taken down and then somebody else will upload it. You get a lot of that.
And YouTube, I don't think it's talked about enough in the music world. And now I know YouTube does have their own music streaming service now, YouTube Music, but I mean, even before that, like Bryan said, people would upload whole albums, or they upload songs from albums and things like that. And I think that was how a lot of bands, musicians got discovered or maybe rediscovered by a lot of people. They'd be cruising through YouTube like, oh, I wonder about this song. And they would find it and be like, oh, wow, here it is. Mm-hmm. And in some cases, those songs might have not even been on streaming services yet. So it was a good resource for people to, get that music. I don't have anything against streaming services other than, the not being able to actually download it and have a safety copy of it. But the problem I have with streaming services is, as Bryan said, they don't really pay the musicians that much money, and I think that is something that does need to be looked into more. It's funny because bands used to complain in the days of, records and CDs that, we'll get like maybe 10 cents for an album or something like that. Well, now they're getting like maybe...
Yeah, your song was streamed like 100,000 times. Here's a $50 check.
Yeah, exactly. And the crazy thing is you would think it would be the exact opposite, because there's no physical media to manufacture, there's no artwork to print up, there's no logistics, there's no shipping and transporting or anything to get this to stores or to get this in people's hands. Literally, you tap a couple buttons on your phone and you can get an album or you can get a song. It's not like back in the day, a record had to be pressed, it had to be put in a jacket, the jacket had to be printed up, it had to be shrink wrapped, it had to be shipped off to a distributor, the distributor had to ship it off to stores, the stores had to put it on a rack. There were a lot of moving parts. And you could see why it cost more money. At the same time, yeah, they probably shouldn't have been charging as much as they were for things. And I think that's kind of what shot compact discs in the foot back in those early days of music streaming and music downloading, was that you could buy an album on iTunes for $10 and the same CD in the store was like $19.99. And a lot of people were like, well, geez, I can get the same thing for less, even though you were getting less technically because you weren't getting a booklet, you weren't getting artwork. You were just getting like a little thumbnail of the artwork along with the download of the MP3 or whatever.
And then we could go into a whole thing about the MP3s and the quality.
And that is one thing I will say about streaming services, is they have improved the sound quality quite a bit. It's not what it was back in the early iTunes days where it was like the lowest quality MP3s. They are a lot better now. There's a lot of really good high quality music streaming service. There are a lot more options out there now, and that is good. But again, I think what it comes down to is people just want that instant gratification. They just want to be able to know, hey, the song's available on this service and I can get it like that. Couple button presses and there it is. It's on my device.
Yeah, and I think it kind of goes right along with the culture too, because a few episodes ago we were talking about social media and like TikTok and stuff, and how like what's the big song for the week that's popular on TikTok, and that's kind of what you're seeing with the streaming services now. You see this artist like getting all these hits and everything, and then all of a sudden like we're done with that, we're going to another song now.
Digital music distribution has always been a double-edged sword for me. Especially Bryan and myself, we were on the cusp of that generation, coming out of like the CD generation and going into the digital download generation. So Bryan and I still have an affinity for physical media, whereas people after that, they don't really care about it. But, I grew up on CDs and cassettes, as you did. That was how we got our music. It's not so much that I have a problem with digital media, because I absolutely don't, but I just can't understand how you'd want to pay for something that you don't actually own. You're paying for the right to listen to it, basically.
True.
You're not actually getting to own it. Digital music streaming has ultimately devalued music. For something that costs so much money to make and takes so much time to make and takes so much effort to make, that it's been devalued as much as it has. And it's really sad. It still costs a lot of money to make an album. You can get pretty much every song in the world on a platform like Spotify or Apple Music for like less than the price of what you would pay for a CD back in the day. You basically have access to all the music in the world. Here's the problem with that. Of all that music, how much are you actually going to listen to? You could start at the very beginning, like at A, and then go all the way to Z. You would never do it. You would need like 3 lifetimes probably to get through all of that music. So it's like, yes, it's great. You have access to every bit of music that's ever been recorded. You're never going to get through it all. You probably don't like most of it. And that $12 or whatever it is that you're paying per month is barely making a dent in any of those bands that you're listening to in their bank account. They would be better served if you actually were to download the song.
Throughout history, the musicians have always been kind of screwed over by those people who are marketing and putting out their music. Now, I will say, nothing is for free. And if you're going to do a contract with someone who's going to get your music out to all these people, I get it. They deserve a cut. But I just think that they've always really made it very difficult for musicians to make a living, especially smaller musicians.
Yeah.
Like, I'm not asking for them to give a ton. Just
be fair.
More than a fraction, at least.
Yeah. And unfortunately, I think that the precedent has already been set. And the thing is, the bands and musicians that are getting millions and millions of streams and are making, pretty decent money off of it, they don't really care because, hey, well, I'm making decent money. And they're probably making decent money anyway, even without the streams, just through their other ventures, their touring, their merchandise, other deals they may have, etc. Well, musicians that aren't on that level yet don't have all that stuff, so we're really mainly depending on, trying to get something off of our music sales. And unfortunately, the best route for making money off your music sales is still physical media. Unfortunately, physical media is very expensive to produce, and that's why digital media is so attractive because, again, there's really no overhead with it. You're just paying for someone to host it. It's a double-edged sword, and while I'm glad that it's here, I do think that there is some room for improvement.
Definitely.
So in this episode, we talked about music streaming services and their impact on musicians and the music industry as a whole. It's got its good points, it's got its bad points, but I certainly hope that some things will be implemented to make it more fair for the musicians and also giving the people what they want. That concludes this episode of Chords and Conversations. We'd like to thank you for listening. I'm Chris Hludzik.
And I'm Bryan Brophy.
And we'll talk to you again soon. The Chords and Conversations podcast was conceived and produced by Bryan Brophy and Chris Hludzik and engineered, edited, mixed, and mastered by Chris Hludzik. The Chords and Conversations podcast theme song is an instrumental version of The Powers That Be by The Latter Day from their 2006 album As We Speak and was written by Chris Hludzik, produced and performed by Bryan Brophy and Chris Hludzik, and engineered, mixed, edited, and mastered by Chris Hludzik. All rights to this podcast and its content reserved by Bryan Brophy and Chris Hludzik.